بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So inshallah in today's lecture I will attempt to do hadiths 242 to hadith 623. I have a feeling I'm going to fall short, but inshallah with Allah's tawfiq we'll get it done. We will begin with Kitab al-Zakah. So we're going to talk about some of the hadith of Zakah. Now some of the hadith of Zakah has to do with the number, the weights upon agriculture and the number of livestock that you have. So I'm going to have with me, inshallah, our handy translation of the Matn of Abi Shuja to remember what those words mean when we come to them, because they're a little bit obscure. Actually, I had to look a lot of them up when I was preparing for the class. So, it's just one of those things where we have to go through it. There's not that many hadith in the zakah, but there are some important things. We will also talk about, for example, the permissibility in giving zakah in advance. We will talk about the impermissibility of giving zakah to the family of the Prophet ﷺ and define that. Then we will talk about zakatul fitr, which is part of zakah but a separate subject, and we'll read the hadith that have to do with that. Not that many hadith. And then following that, we will enter into general charity, a sadaqah. Then we will talk about what's the best type of charity. That's also a famous hadith, juhd al-muqil, the giving when you can't give. And then we're going to talk about taqsim al-sadaqat. So actually I'm wrong. There's a lot of stuff in zakat. Sorry. So taqsim al-sadaqat, giving the zakah out in the different order that's mentioned in the verse in Surah At-Tawbah, إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين, etc. And then inshallah with Allah's tawfiq we'll make it to Kitab al-Siyam, the book of fasting, and then we will talk about not fasting before Ramadan to separate it so that it's an isolated day, and in the Shafi'i madhab therefore not fasting from the 15th of Sha'ban to the end of the month, the fasting, the day of doubt. And then we will talk about some of the hadith dealing with the sighting of the moon, Ru'yatul Hilal, and we'll talk a little bit about those hadith. So those are the major topics that we'll talk about. Inshallah, we'll begin in the next clip. بإذن ta'ala. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. I'm going to go a little bit faster, inshallah. Hadith 242 عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم بعث معاذا إلى اليمن وهو أنه قال له حين بعثه إلى اليمن al-hadith. So this is the hadith I'm not going to read it all because it's very lengthy. It's narrated in al-Shaykhan. This is the recension or the version of Bukhari, that the Prophet ﷺ said, as according to Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, that he sent Mu'adh to Yemen to teach the people the religion. And one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ taught them after the prayer, so he said, teach them the prayer. And then he said, فَإِنْهُمْ أَطَاعُوا لَكَ بِذَلِكَ. So if they follow you and obey you in the prayer, فَأَخْبِرْهُمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ فَرَضَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَدَقَةً فِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ تُؤْخَذُ مِنْ أَغْنِيَائِهِمْ فَتُرَدُّ عَلَى فُقَرَائِهِمْ. Then teach them that Allah Ta'ala has made mandatory a alms on their money. It is taken from their wealthy and given to its poor. Now that hadith is important for two reasons. One reason is it shows us that this is fard, this is an obligation, the zakah. And number two, it tells us that zakah is to take from the excess wealth of the rich and to redistribute it to the poor, meaning that zakah is for people, not for institutions, brick and mortars and things like that. That's the default ruling of it. 243 وعن معاذ رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بعثه إلى اليمن فأمره أن يأخذ من كل 3 بقرة ذكرا أو أنثى تبيعا أو تبيعة ومن كل 40 مسنة. رواه أبو داود وغيره وحسنه الترمذي وصححه ابن حبان والحاكم. So Al-Hakim and Ibn Hibban grade this as sound. This is also on the authority of Mu'adh رضي الله عنه about when he was sent to Yemen, that he was ordered to take from every 30 of the cows one male or female cow, which is a tabi'ah, just 1 second. Yeah, sorry. A tabi'a is a 1-year-old cow. Okay. And then he said, male or female. And then to take a tabi'a or a tabi'a, so either a 1-year-old female cow or 1-year-old male cow, and then from every 40, a musinna. And a musinna is a 2-year cow. That's why I have this with me, so I have the translation. Okay. 244 وعن أبي سعيد رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم ليس فينا دون من 5 أواخ من الورق صدقة ولا فيما دون 5 ذود where's the rest of the hadith صدقة ولا فيما دون 5 أوسق صدقة رواه الشيخان. Bukhari and Muslim narrate this is talking about the zakah limit, the hadd of the zakah on gold and silver. And then on the hadd limit on agricultural fruits. So when it comes to gold and silver, the limit is 5 awaq, which is the plural of uqiyah, which is 40 dirham with the Meccan weight. And as far as the gold, it's ashru 20 mithqal. Okay. In the fiqh that we have in the fiqh al-mawruth, we say that the minimum amount for silver is 200 dirham. So Allahu a'lam, but this probably could be a difference of whether, because in the hadith or in the commentary, Shaykh al-Islam says that this is with the calculation of Meccan. This might be another, like a Baghdadi weight. So I'm not going to necessarily get into that portion. Okay. And then he says, and then there is not in the agriculture, the minimum amount is 5 awsuq, which is about 609.84 kilograms. Hadith 245 وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ليس على المسلم في عبده ولا فرسه صدقة رواه البخاري. So Abu Hurairah narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said, as is recorded in Bukhari, a person does not have to pay zakat on their slaves, on their horse, and by extension, I guess their vehicles and things like that. Those type of things you don't pay zakat on. (246) وعن علي رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إذا كانت لك 100 درهم وحال عليها الحول. This is where the 200 is going to come in. It's in this hadith. ففيها خمسة, that's why I've been pausing, because I'm like, how do you reconcile? ففيها خمسة دراهم وليس عليك شيء يعني في الذهب حتى يكون لك 20 دينارا فإذا كان لك 20 دينارا وحال عليها الحول ففيها نصف دينار فما زاد فبحساب ذلك وليس في المال زكاة حتى يحول عليه الحول. رواه أبو داود بإسناد حسن. Okay, so here the Prophet ﷺ said, is according to Imam Ali alayhi salam, that if you have 200 dirham, 200 gold, then that's the nisab, 200 dirhams, 200 silver coins, that's the nisab for silver, which comes out to be 595 grams of silver. Then that's the nisab for the zakah, and that's what we go with in the madhab. And then in the gold, it's 20 gold pieces, or 20 dinars, which is the equivalent of the 20 mithqal, which is 85 grams of 21 karat gold. We took that in fiqh. And then the year has passed, the hawl has passed, then you are going to pay half of a dinar, and then what is more than that, meaning 2.5%, half of a mithqal. and then there is no zakah until until the year has passed. 247. Also on the authority of Imam Ali alayhi salam, أن العباس عليه السلام سأل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في تعجيل صدقته قبل أن تحل فرخص له في ذلك. رواه أبو داود والترمذي وغيرهما بإسناد حسن كما في المجموع. So Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, and others with a sound chain narrate on the authority of Imam Ali alayhi salam that the uncle of the Prophet sallallahu Al-Abbas alayhi salam, asked the Prophet sallallahu permission to pay zakah in advance in advance, and the Prophet sallallahu permitted that. So in the Shafi'i madhab we allow paying up till 2 years in advance of the zakah. 248. وعن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم فيما سقط السماء والعيون أو كان عثريا العشر وفيما سقي بالنضح نصف العشر. So رواه البخاري. Bukhari narrates on the authority of Abdullah bin Umar radiallahu anhu that the Prophet ﷺ said that land and fruits and agriculture that is aggregated, that is irrigated by rainwater without human intervention, then you're going to pay 1/10 of that in zakah. And then that which is done by the human intervention, you're going to pay 1/5. So 10% for the natural and 5% for the human intervention. 249. وعن أبي يحيى سهل بن أبي حثمة عبد الله بن ساعدة بن عامر بن عدي الخزرجي الأنصاري رضي الله عنه قال أمرنا النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بقوله إذا خرجتم فخذوا الثلث فإن لم تدعوا ثلث فدعوا الربع وغيره وصححه ابن حبان والحاكم. Ibn Habban wal-Hakim narrate on the authority of Abi Yahya Sahl ibn Abi Hathma Abdullah ibn Sa'ida ibn Amir al-Ansari radiyallahu anhu. The Prophet said, إِذَا خَرَسْتُمْ, if you estimate the amount of grapes and dates on the vines and on the trees, so that's like an expert would do that, then you're going to take 1/3 of that for the zakah, and then leave the rest for the owner to distribute as he likes. If you don't take 1/3, then take 1/4. And then we'll pick it up in the next clip, inshallah. Hadith 250. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وفي الركاز إذا بلغ نصابا الخمس رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari Muslim narrate on the authority of Abu Hurairah رضي الله عنه, الركاز is treasure. So gold and silver treasure, if you find it and it reaches the nisab, then you have to pay 1/5 of it, 20%. And that's done right away without the hawl. Okay, now Bab Sadaqatul Fitr, Zakatul Fitr, 251. عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال فرض النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم زكاة الفطر صاعا من تمر أو صاعا من شعير على العبد والحر والذكر والأنثى والصغير والكبير من المسلمين وأمر بها أن تؤدى قبل خروج الناس إلى الصلاة رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Ibn Umar رضي الله عنهما that you gotta pay Zakatul Fitr one sa' of tamr, and the sa' is about 2 liters of food. So 2 liters of staple foods. In this hadith, he says 2 liters of dates, or a sa', 2 liters of sha'ir, of like barley, and therefore the fiqh of it is any other type of staple foods, grains, whatever staple foods of your area, for every free person, slave, male, female, old and young from the Muslims. So everybody in your household that's a Muslim, it doesn't matter even if it's an infant child, you're going to pay the Zakatul Fitr, that 2.2 liters of staple food, that or that dollar amount or currency amount of that, and it needs to go out before Salatul Eid. Now, that's when it's obligatory, but its permissibility to pay is from the first day of Ramadan. So My suggestion to my students is always, when you break your fast the first night of Ramadan and you're going to the mosque to Taraweeh, take the money for the zakatul fitr and then give it then, so the mosque people have time, or the agents have time to distribute it. 252 عن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله عنه قال كنا نعطيها في زمان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم صاعا من طعام أو صاعا من تمر أو صاعا من شعير أو صاعا من زبيب رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Abi Sa'id al-Khudri. So this radiallahu anhu, this emphasizes sort of the fiqh of the previous one, is that zakatul fitr is, the Prophet made it obligatory for us that we take out 2 liters or a sa of dates, a sa of 2 liters of food, 2 liters of dates, or 2 liters of barley, or 2 liters of raisins. Now, each of those items, by the way, when you cut 2 liters of raisins, is going to be much, much more expensive than 2 liters of barley. And that's why people that give a monetary amount for zakatul fitr, it's an approximation, sort of taking the middle of all of that. Okay, general charity, sadaqatul tatawwu'i. 253 عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم 7 يظلهم الله في ظل يوم لا ظل إلا ظله. This is a longer hadith, so I'll shorten it. Narrated by Bukhari and Muslim on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ said, there are 7 people that will be in the shade, in Allah's shade, or the shade of the throne, on the day in which there is no shade. And we ask Allah Ta'ala inshallah to make us amongst them. One of them is وَرَجُلٌ تَصَدَّقَ بِصَدَقٍ فَأَخْفَاهَا حَتَّى لَا تَعْلَمَ شِمَالُهُ مَا تُنْفِقُ يَمِينُهُ. A man or a woman who gives charity to the point that the right hand doesn't know what their left hand gives. So you give it quietly, privately, anonymously. 253, also on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, قيل يا رسول الله أي صدقة أفضل قال جهد المقل وابدأ بمن تعول. رواه أبو داود وغيره وصححه ابن خزيمة والحبان والحاكم. So Ibn Khuzaymah and Hibban and Ibn Hibban and Al-Hakim graded as sound. It's narrated in Abu Dawood. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu says, the Prophet ﷺ was asked, which is the best charity? He said, Juhdul muqil, giving when you can't give. Al-muqil means you have qalil, you have little. Al-juhd, it's like a jihad. You have to, I only have $5 in my pocket, but I'm going to give it. That's all I got, and then I have nothing. It's very different than I have $10,000 in my account and I give $5. It's outwardly the same amount, but one is more reward than the other. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, Ibda biman ta'ul, begin with those who are immediately in your vicinity. 255 وعنه أيضا قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم تصدقوا فقال رجل يا رسول الله عندي دينار قال تصدق به على نفسك قال عندي آخر قال تصدق به على ولدك قال عندي آخر قال تصدق به على خادمك قال عندي آخر قال أمت أبصر. رواه Abu Dawood وغيره وصححه Ibn Hibban والحاكم. So Abu Dawood narrates, and others and Ibn Hibban and Al-Hakim grade as sound on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ said, give charity. So a man said, I have a dinar, I have a gold coin. He said, give charity to yourself. He said, I have more. He said, then give charity to your children. He said, I have more. He said, then give charity to your servants. And he said, I have more. And he said, you know what is best. Meaning you know who is going to be less fortunate than you. This emphasizes ibda bi nafsika thumma biman ta'ul, begin with yourself and then those who are in your immediate vicinity. Okay, now the distribution of the zakat. 256 عن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم لا تحل صدقة لغني إلا لخمسة لعامل عليها أو لرجل اشتراها بماله أو غارم أو غاز في سبيل الله أو مسكين تصدق عليه منها فأهدى منها لغني. رواه أبو داود وغيره وصححه الحاكم. Abu Dawood narrate and Al-Hakim grades as sound on the authority of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ said, you cannot give zakat to a rich person except in 5 instances. Number 1 is that they are the workers of zakat. So from the zakat categories are al-amilin alayha, those that distribute the zakat. So if they're workers in the zakat, they can take it. Or a man who buys the zakat with his own money. So you're going to distribute the zakah like you're going to distribute grains or foods as zakah, and then a rich person buys that and pays you for it. Or a rich person who's in debt, al-gharim, or somebody who is fighting fi sabilillah, even if he's wealthy, he can take from the zakah money to prepare for battle. That's one of the categories. Or a poor person who was given the zakah and then, I don't know why, but they would give it to a rich person. So those are the 5 instances in which a rich person can receive the zakah. In other words, a rich person is not supposed to receive zakah. That's really the understanding of the hadith, except for those 5 specific circumstances. 257. وعن عبد المطلب بن الربيع بن الحارث بن عبد المطلب بن هاشم رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إن صدقة لا تحل لمحمد ولا لآل محمد عليهم السلام. رواه Muslim. So Muslim narrates on the authority of Abd al-Muttalib ibn Rabi'a ibn al-Harith ibn Abd al-Muttalib ibn Hashim. He is the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, and he died in Damascus in the year 62. He said that the sadaqah in the literature of the hadith here in this context means zakah. Just like in the verse of Surah At-Tawbah, إِنَّمَا صَدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ. So he said that zakah is not permissible for the Prophet ﷺ or the family of the Prophet ﷺ, because it comes in another hadith that's narrated by Ad-Daraqutni that it's awsakh an-nas, that the zakah is the filth, the excess filth of people's wealth. And in the Shafi'i madhab, the family of the Prophet ﷺ for these purposes are the believers of Bani Hashim and Bani al-Muttalib alayhim as-salam. 258. وعن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال كان النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم يعطي عمر العطاء فيقول أعطه أفقر مني فيقول خذه فتموله أو تصدق به أو ما جاءك من هذا المال وأنت غير مشرف ولا سائل فخذه وما لا فلا تتبعه نفسك. رواه Muslim. So Muslim narrates on the authority of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhum, the Prophet ﷺ gave money to Umar ibn al-Khattab as like kind of like charity, because he was a simple person, he was a zahid, he was an ascetic, and he said, give this. He said this is for you. And then he said, well, I'll give it to somebody who's less fortunate than me. And this is one of the hadith that we use to indicate, kind of the aesthetic status of Umar radiallahu anhu. He needed that. He wore like tattered clothes. He needed that. But he said, I'll find somebody less than me. I don't need it. So the Prophet ﷺ said, خُذْهُ فَتَمَوَّلْهُ. Take it and then you can distribute it the way you want. So one of the fiqh learnings from this is the permissibility of a tafweed, that you can delegate somebody to distribute the zakah on your behalf. So do with it what you want, give it as sadaqah, or invest it and do something with it, and then the money that comes from that, you can do what you want with it, or you can hold it, or you can distribute it. It's narrated by Muslim, and we'll pick up the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, we actually made it to Kitab al-Siyam. 259. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تقدم رمضان بصوم يوم ولا يومين إلى رجل كان يصوم صوما فليصمه رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Abi Hurairah radiallahu anhu that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, do not fast a day or two before Ramadan, i.e. like when you're in the 28th and the 29th or the 29th or the 30th of Sha'ban, don't fast those days so you can demarcate what is Sha'ban from what is Ramadan, except a man or a woman who has a customary fast at that time and they choose to fast at that time. So sometimes there are people that develop a spiritual practice. I'm going to fast, every Monday and Thursday no matter what. So in that case, if Thursday is the 29th of Sha'ban and then Friday is the 1st of Ramadan, but you fast every Monday and Thursday, in that case you can fast that Thursday. So that would essentially mean that you would fast the last day of Sha'ban plus the 29 or 30 days of Ramadan. But if you're not a person who fasts in that manner, then you need to leave the gap in Ramadan. How long is that gap? That will come in a couple of hadiths from now. 260. وعن عمار بن ياسر رضي الله عنهما قال: من صام اليوم الذي يشك فيه فقد عصى أبا القاسم عليه الصلاة والسلام. ذكره البخاري تعليقا ووصله أبو داود وغيره. So Bukhari narrates the hadith, this hadith mu'allaq, going back to the Sahabi, but then Abu Dawood and others in the Tirmidhi connected all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ, on the authority of Ammar ibn Yasir, who said, whoever fasts the day of doubt, they have transgressed against Abu al-Qasim, it's the kunya of the Prophet ﷺ. The day of doubt is the last day of Sha'ban, or the 30th of Sha'ban rather, sorry. So every lunar month is 29 days and a little bit. So depending on the sighting of the moon, a lunar month will be 29 or 30 days. So if today is the 29th of Sha'ban and somebody says we didn't see the moon, as we will see later, we're going to continue fasting 30 days, then I can say, well, I'll just fast this. Maybe it's somebody saw the moon, so maybe just in case it's Ramadan. That's called Yawm al-Shak, the day of doubt. And we are not allowed to fast it. For us, it's haram. And I think there are some other dispensations and some other madhabs that make it less than haram. Okay, 261. وعن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما قال قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إذا رأيتموه فصوموا وإذا رأيتموه فأفطروا فإن غم عليكم فأكملوا العدة 30. رواه الشيخان واللفظ للبخاري. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate, and this is Bukhari's version on the authority of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, the Prophet ﷺ said, fast based on the sighting of the moon, and then when you sight the moon again, break your fast. If it is clouded, so continue or complete the month 30 days. So as I said, the lunar month is 29 days and a little bit. So therefore, based on if you can actually see the moon, it's the month is going to be 29 or 30 days. We begin each month by the sighting of the new moon of the following month. If you can't see the moon when you go out on the 29th after Maghrib, then you fast 30 days. Now when it comes to the fiqh of calculations and all of that, there is room in the Shafi'i madhab for the calculations. And As-Subki in his Fatawa talks about that, radiyallahu anhu. But there is no, for up until now, there is no hard-clad argument for a calculations only approach. There's room for calculation. But as long as we have the ability to go out and see somewhere in the region in which we live, the sky is clear, we have telescopes, we have observatories, then we have to go there because of these hadith. There might come a time where there is no possibility of seeing the moon because of light pollution and all of that, in which case we will have no option but to rely on the calculation. In the hadith of the Dajjal, I think that came, I can't remember if it came in this class or in another class with you, the Prophet ﷺ said, a day will be like 40 days, etc. Do we pray just once? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Uqduru lah," you have to calculate, and because you have to pray 5 times every day. So the fuqaha, the later fuqaha understood from this hadith that there could be a situation in which, the atmospheric or astronomical signs that we have, bin najmihum yahtadun, all the verses that we have might not work. And in which case we have to calculate. So it's not that there's no room for calculation, but we're not there yet. So in other words, we want to sight the moon. 262. وعن أم المؤمنين حفصة بنت عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنهما قالت قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من لم يبيت الصيام قبل الفجر فلا صيام له. رواه أبو داود وترمذي وغيرهما وصححه ابن الخزيمة وحبان. So Ibn Hibban and Ibn Khuzaymah grade this as Sahih. It's narrated by Abu Dawood and At-Tirmidhi that our mother al-Mu'mineen Hafsa alayhi salam, the daughter of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, she said that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, whoever does not have the intention to fast in Ramadan the night before fasting, there is no fasting for them. So based on this hadith, the fuqaha of the Shafi'is, we say that you have to have the intention the night before each night of Ramadan for it to be valid. So the way we break our fast is, you have the date in your hand, you hear the adhan of Maghrib, Allahumma laka sumtu ala rizqak iftart, nuwaytu siyam ghadan min Ramadan. You say the dua, a series of du'as to break your fast, and then you also add, and I make intention to fast tomorrow in Ramadan. 623 وعن أبي العباس سهل بن سعد رضي الله عنه قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يزال الناس بخير ما عجلوا الفطرة رواه الشيخان. Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Abi al-Abbas Sahl ibn Sa'ad that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, there's goodness in people. Sorry, this Sahabi, he narrates 188 hadith. The last of the Sahaba to die in Medina, he died in the year 88. And he was over 100 years old. Radiallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ said, good is in the ummah or in the people as long as they break their fast quickly. So the minute we hear the Maghrib, we break our fast. We don't wait. In a rare instance, I'm actually going to go beyond what was the target for today and keep going because we have more time in today's clip. Hadith 264. وعن أنس ابن مالك رضي الله عنه قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم تسحروا فإن في السحور بركة. رواه الشيخان. So Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, the Prophet ﷺ said, have suhoor, the pre-dawn meal, because in the suhoor there is a blessing. So the sunnah for us is that we wake up before Fajr by a little bit, maybe 30, 40 minutes or something, and we have something to eat. 265 وعن سلمان ابن عامر رضي الله عنه قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إذا أفطر أحدكم فليفطر على تمر فإن لم يجد فليفطر على ماء فإنه طهور. رواه أبو داود وغيره وصححه ابن خزيمة وحبان والحاكم. So Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Hibban and Al-Hakim, great sound. It's narrated in Abu Dawood that the Prophet ﷺ said, according to Salman, on the authority of Salman ibn Amir, the Prophet ﷺ said, when you break your fast on dates. And if you can't, then break your fast on water because in it is a purity. So the sunnah for us is to break our fast on dates and or just water. 266 وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال نهى النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم عن الوصال فقال رجل من المسلمين فإنك يا رسول الله تواصل فقال وأيكم مثلي إني أبيت يطعمني ربي ويسقين فلما أبوا أن ينتهوا عن الوصال الواصل بهم يوما ثم رأوا الهلال فقال لو تأخر الهلال لزدتكم كالمنكل لهم حين أبوا أن ينتهوا رواه الشيخان. So the Bukhari and Muslim narrate on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam forbade the companions from al-wisal, which is fasting more than a 24-hour cycle. So one of the men said, but you do that, Ya Rasulullah. He said, well, who are you? Who amongst you are like me? I spend the evening with my Lord. He feeds me and he gives me sustenance, which is one of the khasa'is of the Prophet ﷺ, that he did not sleep. And this is a karaha of tahrim for us, is to fast more than a 24-hour cycle without eating or drinking. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Okay, in today's class we were able to take the section of zakah. So we talked about the obligatory nature of zakah. We talked about the hadith that talks about some of the nisab or the minimal zakatable amount of livestock, of fruit, of gold, and of silver. And that there's no zakah on your personal, your horse and your home, things like that. And then we talked about the permissibility in the Shafi'i method of paying the zakat 2 years in advance, up to 2 years in advance. We talked about zakat of agriculture that's irrigated naturally versus through intervention. And then we talked about the zakat on treasure. Then we talked about the zakat on zakatul fitr, how it's obligatory, around 2 liters of the staple food for every Muslim in your household. We learned that it's obligatory before Eid prayer, but permissible from the beginning of Ramadan. Then we talked about general charity, and giving when you can't give is the best form of charity, to begin with yourself and those in your immediate vicinity for charity purposes. Then we talked about the distribution of zakah, and we talked about the odd situation of a rich person receiving zakah money. And then we talked about the impermissibility of giving zakat to the family of the Prophet ﷺ. And then we talked about deputizing other people to distribute the zakat. Then we entered into the book of fasting, and we talked about needing the obligation in the Shafi'i method to differentiate between Sha'ban and Ramadan. So we don't fast we didn't get to that hadith yet, but we don't fast from the 15th of Sha'ban to the end, except if it's a habit that somebody has. It's also haram for us to fast the day of doubt, which is the 30th of Sha'ban. Then we talked about the obligation of fasting and breaking the fast based on the sighting of the moon. And then we talked about the obligation in the Shafi'i madhab to have the intention the night before to fast. And then we talked about eating the iftar quickly, delaying the suhoor and having the suhoor. And then we talked about breaking the fast on dates and water. And then we talked about the impermissibility of fasting continually more than 24 hours. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.